as a pastor, you might be tempted to think that if you devote yourself fully to God, that if you live a righteous life and you keep increasing your levels of righteousness and you set higher and higher precedents and standards and you just devote yourself more and more fully to God, that the more that you get that in line, the greater and faster the kingdom of heaven will grow around you. But you're going to find this is absolutely not the case. In fact, you might see the kingdom of heaven shrink around you and get refined. Even Jesus, when he had thousands of followers, in an afternoon, had many depart and leave, and he was left with about 12. If you'll remember, at the cross, he had fewer than that. So as you are giving yourself to righteousness, it can get very discouraging to look around you and see someone that is obviously and patently false or deceptive or even evil, claiming to be a Christian, who is gathering a following and at 10 times the speed of anything that you've ever seen happen. Well, here, I want to explain how this happens. We are supposed to worship God with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength. We are supposed to be totally devoted to serving Him. Now, as Christians, we know that this does not happen. Christians do not do as they're supposed to, and we do not worship God to the highest and fullest degree. But by default, we have to worship. We are forced to worship. Something in us worships. It has to have an object of its worship. Now, since no human being naturally worships God as much as he should be, then something begins to creep into that place, whether it is an idol or a hobby or a passion or material things. But often is the case is that a human being steps in and becomes worshiped in this fashion or regard. And so one of those things, or one of the things to consider, is that the nominal Christian, or any Christian for that matter, except for the very, very, very few, would say that they themselves are worth worshiping, because looking at their flaws, they're like, well, I'm a Christian because I see my flaws and I need Jesus to be my Savior. So we accept the salvation, we are following the Lord, but again, we're not worshiping as highly as we should be. But we also know that we cannot worship ourselves because we're not worth worshiping. But since there is a vacancy, and since God above is not being worshiped as he should be, and we know we can't worship the world or ourselves, by default, we are prone to worshiping whatever Christian teacher that comes along who proclaims superiority, who claims to know things that we don't know, who claims quite awesome abilities, and they are impressive in their nature and their charisma, etc. And so by default, if we're not worshiping God, we're not worshiping things around us, we're not worshiping ourselves, we can quickly and easily fall into the trap of worshiping a Christian leader and exalting them to incredibly high status. Of course, you ask any of these people, are you worshiping this person? But no, we're supposed to only worship God. But by default, the allegiance, the loyalty, the credibility they give to this Christian leader is awful and wrong and should only be donated and dedicated and given unto the Lord. Now, you can see where this creates an awful gap. Who of us would step forward and like, I am the Christian leader worth following? And again, by default, if someone does, though, if someone is impressive enough to say that and does say that, then we jump on board en masse. Christians everywhere just, that person is worth following. And there are some that might not say it, but they act it and portray it, and Christians by default eat it up. The reason I mention this is because, number one, we need to know how this is happening, like why focusing on the ministry doesn't necessarily yield fantastic results, or why evil ministry might yield quote unquote fantastic results, or why we even betray ourselves sometimes and elevate men to positions that they do not need to be in. If we are aware of this default worship process and how the fakes can easily step in and take high status and high profile in a short amount of time, then we can be on our guard, and we absolutely need to be, because even the elect, closer to the end of the time, are going to be very prone to deception, and we know that there is some kind of great deception and falling away, and I simply don't want you to be a part of it. So take note, take heart, focus on the scriptures, and let the Lord guide you and help him to see when these kind of things are happening in your life.